Hello and welcome to Gothenburg, the second biggest city in Sweden. I've been to Sweden to speak in Stockholm quite a number of times over the years, but not for a long time. And coming back to Sweden, it has the feel of a different place. People will recall that it's been in the headlines a lot in recent times for all the wrong reasons. Of course, Donald Trump talked about the problems of Sweden in a speech which kicked it off again. People saying, well, what's going on in Sweden? And it comes down to a theme, of course, that can be seen throughout Europe, and that is the scale of immigration. Sweden is a country of 9.5 to 10 million people, and yet it has taken per capita, per head of population, greatly more migrants than any other country in Europe. And of course, when you put those numbers together, it's quite obviously going to have an impact on life in Sweden, and that's certainly the case. But before I get into that, I just want to read a quote from someone I've quoted extensively in part of my last book, Phantom Self. He's a man called, or was called, Dr. Richard Day. He was a Rockefeller family insider, big-time insider, and an executive of the Rockefeller-created organization Planned Parenthood. And in 1969, he stood up at a meeting, a conference of pediatricians in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, because he was obviously in the medical profession. And he asked people to turn off recording equipment and not to take notes, because he was going to tell them how the world was going to change, because basically the group that he represented or was part of was going to change it. And if you read the quotes and what he said that night at length in Phantom Self, you will be taken aback at how extraordinarily accurate he was in terms of current events, even in detail. And the reason I mention that is this quote from Dr. Richard Day in 1969. And there was one doctor called Lawrence Dunnigan in the audience who did take notes. And before he died, I think it was in 2004, he did a series of interviews explaining what Richard Day had said that night. And this is one quote. There will be mass migrations of people without roots in their new locations, because traditions are easier to change in a place where there are a lot of transplanted people, as compared to trying to change traditions in a place where people grew up and had an extended family where they had roots. And that was 1969. And how that mirrors current events. I've been contending for some considerable time that what we're seeing is the manipulation both of the migrants coming in such large numbers into Europe and of the indigenous population, with the strings attached to both held by the same hand. Because there is a plan that's been long, clearly, but longer than that, in the making, to transform European society. Because they do not want individuality and uniqueness in their planned world system. They just want uniformity. Look at any dictator, whether it's fascism, communism, any kind of dictator. What are they looking for overwhelmingly, again and again and again? They're looking for uniformity. Uniformity even in the architecture. I mean, look at the old Soviet Union. And they certainly want uniformity in culture and uniformity in view, because that's what centralized control of everything does. And so across Europe, we've had this massive influx of migrants. And the term used is refugees. Now, nobody supports helping refugees of war, particularly wars that are created by the West, not least all those in the Middle East and Syria. No one supports helping refugees fleeing that horror more than me. We should do all we can. But that is not only what is happening. If you look at the images of the vast multitudes of people coming into Europe out of Africa and the Middle East, they are overwhelmingly dominated by adult young men. And if you take the case of Sweden, when you open the doors indiscriminately to anyone, not those in need, those that need help, anyone, those who are coming in as a result of those fleeing war, coming in on that flow, when you open the doors to anyone, clearly, let's not talk about racism for a second. Let's talk about mathematics. Let's talk about sheer numbers. And let's talk about the fact that two cultures, very different, with very different attitudes to women, for instance, are brought together in terms of numbers over a very short time. And there's this belief, this naivety in government, although go deep in the shadows and you're looking at that quote, it's being done systematically. But in the rest of government that's not in on that, the naivety that that's not going to cause problems is breathtaking. And Sweden has always had a reputation, and rightly, for being open-hearted to and welcoming to those who have been fleeing wars. They've done it for so long. Different wars, they've taken people in and helped them. And that has largely led to the integration of those people. But starting in the 1960s, because in Sweden, as in Britain, this goes back a long time, people have been allowed into Sweden more and more and more. And then came, of course, the great exodus that we've been seeing as a result of, in terms of the refugees, Western actions in the Middle East, Iraq, Libya, and Syria. The numbers have just exploded. And of course, this is going to cause problems. I mean, people have been allowed in with no papers, with no knowledge of their background. They've been allowed in as children when they're clearly adults. And we come back to this reverse racism. If you show me any group of people, no matter what their color and what their background, what their culture, any of it, and in that group, I will show you nice people, lovely people, caring people, genuine people. And I'll show you people who are all right people. Yeah, they're all right. But I'll also show you, whether they're black, white, or orange with spots on. I'll show you some seriously unpleasant people. And when I talk about reverse inverted racism, this is what I mean. The ultimate non-racism is to say, I'm going to judge everyone, no matter what their ethnic background, color, creed, religion, anything. I'm going to judge them by what they say and what they do. That's it. That's the way I'm going to judge them. That's the ultimate non-racism, because you're treating everyone the same and you're just then deciding on your perceptions of them based on what they say and do. What happens in Sweden and in other parts of Europe, but it's very clear to see in Sweden, is that political correctness doesn't allow people to be judged purely on what they do and what they say. Because you can say things about the indigenous population, about the crime, about attacks on women, and you can say what you like. But when you say it about those minority, it is a minority, of course it's a minority, of those who've migrated into Sweden. You say the same about their crime, their attacks on women, which there have been a very large number, then you're a racist. That's it. No debate. No, well, yeah, that's unacceptable behavior. No, you're racist. And when you have police officers coming out and saying, we're not really allowed to talk about the ethnic background of people that attack women and commit crime, because political correctness says that will create antagonism towards migrants, you are in a situation of absolute reverse racism. Do you know, it's interesting, over the years, the most racist people I've ever met are anti-racists. Because they are obsessed with race. They're obsessed with labels. Instead of saying, we're going to look at people based on what they say and what they do. Therefore, a white person doing an attack on a woman is going to be seen in the same terms as a non-white person doing an attack on a woman, and vice versa. The attack on the woman is the common denominator. Race irrelevant. The crime is what's important. But what political correctness says, and like I say, it's vehement in Sweden, is you can't do that. You can about the white person, you cannot about the non-white person. And this is racism. And it's interesting and very significant to note that political correctness is at its most extreme where there is the most fierce effort to censor what people say and what people perceive on the basis of race. You know, if there's going to be, if we're going to have a non-racial society, a non-racist society, well, I'm all for that, then everyone has got to be treated the same. There can't be rules for one and rules for the other. There has to be open debate. But what's happened because of political correctness in Sweden and so many other countries is that debate has been replaced with abuse. And I remember it. I was born and brought up in Leicester, in the English Midlands. And I was brought up in the 50s. And then through the 1960s, there was a big influx of people from the West Indies, particularly into Leicester. And but that was fine. Everyone kind of got on, and there was an integration, and most of it was fine. But then came massive influxes from other parts of the world, from Africa, from Asia, etc. And we're back to numbers. The numbers in such a short time were enormous, and they changed the nature of the city. Okay, but what was happening in Leicester back in the 70s, 60s, 70s, particularly the 70s, was that people in the communities that were suddenly surrounded by a culture that they knew nothing about in such a short time, when they said and expressed their bewilderment, their fear at this, their world had suddenly changed dramatically. Their streets had changed. People around them had changed. The culture had changed. Now, if people really had compassion, if they really had empathy, instead of politically correct slogans, they would look at those people and they'd say, yes, do you know what? I understand it. I understand what it must be like to have the world around you suddenly change. Maybe you're, in your 60s, even 70s. I can understand that it's this sudden change. And you must be listened to. Your voice must be heard. But no, what was happening in Leicester decades ago when that happened was the same as happening now. Those people were not listened to. They were called racists. They weren't racist. They were just bewildered at their communities suddenly transforming in such a short time. And this is what political correctness is about. They talk about being about compassion and diversity. It's not. It's about shutting people up and silencing people. And, there is a price to pay for that. And I do have to smile, ironically, to myself when I see so-called progressives and the PC zealots who are complaining and saying, oh, look, the rise of populism, oh, my God, Brexit and Marine Le Pen. And in Sweden, there's been an enormous, almost out of nowhere, support for a political party called the Swedish Democrats. And all these political parties that have sprung up in terms of sudden popularity around Europe, in the Netherlands too, have a common theme, and that is they want to lessen the number of migrants coming into the country. Now, the progressives and the PC zealots go, oh, this is terrible, oh, it's terrible. They've frickin' caused it. Because if you ignore people and you ignore their grievances, you ignore their complaints, you ignore their experience because you're racist, don't listen, don't have some compassion, a bit of empathy. You're racist, that's it. I'm pure. Then they're gonna be looking for another way to express themselves, which you, the progressives, are silencing. And so these parties are gaining support. And they're gaining support not because the people of Europe are racist, not because the people of Sweden are racist. Of course, there's racists everywhere. They're idiots. but not on the scale that is supporting these parties. They're looking for a way of expressing their frustration, their fear of what's going on. And what is called racism is so often simply mathematics. So many people, migrants, have come into Sweden in such a short time in comparison with the population. And when they are given the right to stay, they get income from the government, they get housing from the government. Simple mathematics says this can't go on indefinitely because of the financial implications alone. And what's happening? Services and things that the government has been financing all through this modern history of Sweden, in education, in services to old people, financial support for old people, are starting to go backwards because the economy simply cannot support so many people of any colour, creed, coming in, who great numbers of them can't speak Swedish. That's understandable, neither can I. They can't write Swedish, they can't read Swedish. So look at the employment possibilities receding over the horizon immediately with that. And so they're supported by government indefinitely because of that and other reasons. It's sheer mathematics, but of course, the PC zealots, they didn't do the maths class. They just did the look how pure I am class. And we are looking at a situation created by this PC zealotry, this frustration that's been created by it, where there is every chance that this is going to kick off all over Europe because those in authority, supported by the PC up their own arses, will not address basic facts, basic obvious situations. And we have a party in Sweden here called the Feminist Initiative. And it's headed up by a lady who was born in Uganda, the first leader, so I was reading, the first black leader of a political party. And, you know, good luck to her, fine. Don't care what colour or creed she is. I'm interested in what she says and what she does. You know, that non-racism thing, you know, that might catch on. What do you think? But what she and that party wants, despite all that I've said and all that Swedish people could tell you in much greater detail, she wants an end to all blocks on immigration into Sweden. Look, let everybody in. An end to deportation of migrants who commit crimes, including clearly rape of women. And she's a feminist, by the way, hence Feminist Initiative. And the reason she says that migrants should not be deported if they commit crimes is because white Swedes aren't deported if they commit crimes. The little matter of where you would deport a Swedish-born white person to, if they committed a crime, is lost on this lady and lost on her party because PC zealotry doesn't do critical thinking. It doesn't do basic intelligence. It just screams its slogans, usually with racist in there somewhere. And this combination of massive immigration into countries in Europe and the PC mafia, the PC stormtroopers who are shouting racist at anyone who's saying, this can't go on. That combination is going to seriously kick off at some point. And when it does, they'll blame the people that kick it off. But the people who are at the foundation of what is inevitable if this doesn't change are those PC extremists who think what they believe is the only thing that anyone can believe.